invitation. And I want to thank all of you, Amir, Anushe, all of you, for organizing this conference and for inviting me to, so to speak, do the stage setting keynote to it, because the title itself, AI for Good, it recognizes that how AI, like other technological breakthroughs, how it's developed, how it's applied, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It really hinges on our guiding values, which in turn, of course, are embedded in our cultural, social, and economic systems, which is why I'm going to be talking with you about, as Amir said, about foundations for an equitable and sustainable new normal and what we can do to build it in this time of rapid technological and social change, including the rapid development and implementation of AI. And I too want to start with where we are with the COVID-19 pandemic, because even though yes, it has brought out and showed us how much good there is in so many of us, it has also revealed the fragility, the lack of resilience, not to speak of the inequities and inequalities of our present social, cultural, economic systems. So we hear a lot today, don't we, about returning to normal. But I don't think we want to do that. If we really think about it, even before this pandemic, like in the wealthy United States, 1/4 of all children lived in poverty. Billions worldwide lived and live in poverty, not to speak of the fact that we've been literally destroying our natural life support systems. So what I'm going to be talking with you about is building a new normal I call partnerism. And I know that partnerism is probably a new term, well, for many of you, but Einstein put it very well. He said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. We need new thinking. And as those of you familiar with my work with books such as The Chalice and the Blade, which, by the way, is now in its 57th US printing and about 40 foreign editions. And again, to fast forward to my most recent book, which came out a few months ago with Oxford University Press, Nurturing Our Humanity. As you know, my work has been dedicated to new thinking, especially to how we can bring about a more just and caring world. A world in which AI and other technological breakthroughs like biotechnology, nanotechnology will actually be used for the common good. So I want to ask you to begin with to step out of your comfort zones and to take a fresh look at the old categories that we've been all taught, because if you really think, and this does require new thinking, about these conventional social and economic categories that we've all been taught, you see that there have been repressive, violent, unjust regimes in every one of them, whether they're right or left, east or west, religious or secular, socialist or capitalist, northern and southern, and so forth. None of them tell us what we need in order to create a better world. And not only that, and this is really critical, these conventional categories, if you really think about it freshly, they marginalize or just ignore the majority of humanity, women and children. So what I've introduced is a new, more inclusive and holistic way of looking at our social, economic, cultural systems, because that's what we need to start with to create a better world. And this is the new lens of the partnership domination social scale, which I want to add is the impetus for the growing partnerism movement to accelerate the shift from the domination side to the partnership side. So we've got a lot to cover, but I would like to start on a personal note because my passion, and yes, I have a lot of passion for this work, it's really deeply rooted in my own childhood. I was born in Europe at a time of massive regression to the domination side of the partnership domination social scale. It was the rise of the Nazis, first in Germany, then in my native Austria. So from one day to the next, my parents and I, we became hunted with license to kill. And I was a very small child, but I still remember how I watched with horror as a gang of Gestapo men broke into our home, dragged my father away. And it was by a miracle, only by a miracle, that my mother actually obtained his release and we were able to escape by a hair's breadth to Cuba, where I grew up in the industrial slums of Havana because, yeah, the Nazis confiscated, that's an official word for armed robbery, isn't it? They confiscated everything my parents had. And there I experienced and witnessed another injustice, the terrible poverty, the enormous gaps between haves and have-nots at that time in Cuba. And it was also there that I learned that most of my extended family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust, as would have happened to my parents and me had we not by a miracle escaped. Now, these traumatic experiences obviously had a huge impact on me, and they led me to the questions that eventually led to my research. Questions that I think many of you have probably asked at some point in your lives. Questions like why, when I saw in my mother, who really risked her life out of love on that crystal night that I just told you about, many Jewish people were killed that night. Why, when we have such an enormous human capacity for consciousness, for caring, for creativity, why has there been so much destructiveness, so much cruelty, so much insensitivity and violence? Is it, as we're often told, inevitable, just quote human nature, or are there alternatives? And if so, what are they? And yes, I found that there are alternatives. There is an alternative. But of course, I did not start my research until much later. And when I did, it became clear, as I said, that I could not answer these questions looking at societies through the lenses of conventional categories, or for that matter, of conventional studies of society, that to answer them actually requires looking at the whole of society and not marginalizing the majority of humanity. Also, I drew from a database that includes the whole of our lives, including where we all live, our family, and other intimate relations. And yes, the whole of our history, including the millennia we call prehistory. And when you do this, you can see social configurations that keep repeating themselves historically and cross-culturally. And really configurations that are otherwise invisible, the configurations of what I've called the domination system and the partnership system. Now, the good news is that we don't have to start from square one to move to partnership-oriented societies again. And I say again, because there is today enormous, enormous evidence dispelling the old story, that story that's so vividly and graphically depicted in that caveman cartoon, that we're all familiar with, that we actually think nothing of showing children before their brains, including much less their critical faculties are developed. He's holding a club, a weapon, in one hand, and he's dragging a woman by the hair with the other. So, what does it tell us? Well, it tells us that too bad, but it's always been this way. And by implication, it always will be violence, injustice, male dominance. That's just human nature. Now, that is a false story. We today know that for thousands and thousands of years in our prehistory, societies oriented more to the partnership side of the partnership domination social scale. They were not ideal, but they were, and they were more egalitarian, they were more gender balanced. Children were not terrorized into submission. Violence, starting with the family all the way to intergroup relations, was not the norm. In fact, we're learning from archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, even DNA studies that warfare is at the most 5,000 to 10,000 years old, which is really, if you think about it, a drop in the evolutionary bucket. So for most of our human adventure here on Earth, we did not live in domination-oriented societies, which are themselves, they brought in warfare. They're themselves just a recent development in our cultural evolution starting about 5 to 10,000 years ago. Not only that, if we look at history, recorded history, written history, through the lens of the partnership domination social scale, we see that, well, if you look at modern history, for example, it's not just, as we're taught in our schools, this random collection of events, because what we can then see is modern history is a strong movement towards partnership systems countered by enormous domination resistance, and yes, punctured by periodic regressions like the one that we're seeing worldwide today. What we can see, and this is really important, is that despite their differences, every progressive social movement has actually challenged the same thing, a tradition of domination. Think about it. The Enlightenment, the so-called rights of man movement, what did it challenge? It challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule over their subjects. The feminist, later women's rights, women's liberation movements challenged again the supposedly divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the castles of their homes. Think about the anti-slavery, the later civil rights, anti-colonial, the Black Lives Matter movements. They challenge another tradition of domination, the so-called, again, once considered divinely ordained right of a supposedly superior race to rule over inferior ones. The movements for social and economic equity challenge top-down rule and control. The peace movement, and more recently, the movement to stop violence against women and children, which is still a global pandemic, which is finally gaining some attention as we're moving a little bit more towards partnership. They challenge the use of force to impose one's will on others, all the way to the environmental movement, which challenges, well, our once hallowed conquest and domination of nature, which at this level of technological development could take our species to an evolutionary dead end. But, and this is very important, if you look more closely, you see that these movements focus primarily on dismantling what I call the top of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined, which left in place the foundations on which the pyramid keeps rebuilding itself in regression after regression, whether it's secular, like Nazi Germany on the right, or Stalin's Soviet Union on the left, or religious, like so-called religious fundamentalism, which if you really think about it, it's domination fundamentalism, what's it about? It's about top-down control, isn't it, in both the family and the state or tribe. It can be Eastern or Western, Northern or Southern, uh, like Khomeini's Iran, ISIS, Boko Haram in Africa, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan, or the rightist fundamentalist alliance in the United States, which has for the last decades had so much influence in US policies. So if we are to prevent these regressions and all the harm they do, if we are to build a more equitable and sustainable caring world where, yes, technological breakthroughs like AI are really used for the common good, we've got to pay attention, much more attention, to the foundations on which politics, economics rest. Because unless we shift these foundations, we'll continue to have regressions with all the suffering they bring. And yes, AI and other technological breakthroughs will be used in service of domination, be it of people or of nature, rather than for the common good. All of which takes me to what I want to use the rest of our time together to discuss: 4 cornerstones that we have to shift from domination to partnership. And as you can see, these are quite different from what the mainstream conversation, as well as the academic conversation, has been, at least until now. And these are the cornerstones for either a domination system or a partnership oriented. It's always a matter of degree. Now, the first cornerstone that we have to shift from domination to partnership is childhood. Why? Well, we know today from both biological and social science that what children first experience and observe directly impacts how our brains develop, and hence how we think, how we feel, how we act, including how we vote, what kinds of policies we support, and yes, how we develop and apply technological breakthroughs. This is detailed in Nurturing Our Humanity, my new book, which has so many findings from neuroscience showing, well, what we today know, that our brain's neural pathways are not set at birth. The issue is not genes. We've been told a false story. We have the capacity, yes, for cruelty, for violence, for insensitivity. We see that, but we also have an enormous capacity. Indeed, as we show through really study after study in Nurturing Our Humanity, if anything, we are wired more for caring and sharing than for dominating and for violence. But we've been told a false story, because the issue is really gene expression. And yes, the first years, childhood, are the time when our brains develop in interaction with our environments, which of course for us humans are primarily, aren't they, cultural. And yes, they are very different depending on the degree of orientation of our families, of education, religion, everything, to either the domination or the partnership configuration. So consider that when family relations are based on chronic violations of human rights, as they are in rigid domination systems, where these are considered normal, even moral, children acquire a mental and emotional model for accepting these violations in all relations. And if they are violent, and this is really important, children learn that violence from the more powerful to the less powerful is an acceptable way of imposing your will on others, of controlling others. Now, fortunately, there are people who reject these teachings, but many others replicate them, not only in intimate relations, but also in national and international ones. So what happens? They'll vote for and accept punitive policies and practices. They'll accept and even yearn for strongman rule. They'll go into denial about their own childhood experiences and instead divert their pain and rage into what we see so much of resurging today, scapegoating, scapegoating the groups that their authority figures tell them are to blame for all their troubles. All the convoluted psychosocial dynamics we are today finally examining. Now, fortunately, we can change all through life, but studies from neuroscience also show that for people from rigid domination backgrounds, where caring is inextricably connected with coercion and often with fear and with violence, fear of force, it is very difficult to change. And indeed, we have studies today showing that this difficulty is actually reflected in how the brain is structured, which of course helps to explain climate change denial and other inabilities to adapt to change or even accept change. So what do we do? Well, the first step is recognizing the problem. We're finding out today through studies such as the ACEs or Adverse Childhood Experiences study that even in the United States, where genital mutilation, child marriage, child violence in schools as well as in families and terrible violence, where they're not culturally accepted, that the highly stressful childhood experiences found in domination-oriented cultures and subcultures are still very prevalent, and we have to change that. Now, the good news, again, is we have many resources today for partnership rather than domination parenting, for authoritative rather, because children do need limits, rather than authoritarian and nonviolent parenting, or for other caregivers of children. And one of these I want to point you to is the Caring and Connected Parenting Guide, based on the latest neuroscience, which you can download for free in both English and Spanish at centerforpartnership.org, a site that, by the way, has many more resources, many more useful tools, which takes us directly to the second cornerstone for a new and better normal, gender. And I'm so glad you've got a gender track. But, again, we've been taught that how gender roles and relations are culturally constructed, that's just a women's issue, just a gender issue. In reality, as you will see, it is a central social, economic, and technological issue that directly affects all of us, women, men, everybody in between, children of all genders, and even beyond that, that directly affects what we are taught is or is not valuable, which is very important in terms of AI, isn't it? Let's start with what children learn about what it means to be a girl or a boy, a woman or a man in rigid domination systems. Actually, they learn another lesson necessary for the imposition or maintenance of these kinds of systems, because what they're taught is to equate difference, beginning with the fundamental difference in our species between the female and male forms, with superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving, hardly a model for social, racial, economic equity, because when children acquire this mental and emotional template, as I said, before their brains are fully formed, much less their critical faculty, they have a template that they can automatically apply to other differences, whether it's a different race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. So in parts of the Middle East, it can be Shia versus Sunni or Sunni versus Shia. In the US, it can be racism. In the Europe where I grew up and resurging worldwide today, it can be anti-Semitism or anti-immigrant or scapegoating a different sexual orientation. Uh, Simply put, what they get a template for is in-group versus out-group thinking. And that's not all. Children in domination cultures and subcultures also learns yet another key lesson through gender and how it's constructed in domination systems that's foundational to imposing and maintaining these systems. And that this is really critical. They learn that not only women, but anything that is stereotypically associated with women has nothing to do with anything inherent in women or men, which of course includes caring, caregiving, and nonviolence, which we're told are not appropriate for real men, right? They are not as important as anything associated with men and so-called hard masculine activities like conquest and domination. So what have we inherited from more rigid domination times? A gendered system of values that we really have to unpack, because along with the subordination of the female half of humanity comes the subordination of part of our humanity, an essential part of our humanity in both women and men: caring, caregiving, nonviolence, and other traits and activities that are in domination systems, stereotypically associated with femininity. And this gendered system of values actually affects women, of course, girls very much so. You know, in some parts of the world, for example, girls are still deprived of education, deprived of healthcare, even of food in times of hardship. But it actually affects us negatively, everyone, because, and we at the Center of Partnership Studies, by the way, back in 1995, did a study using statistical data from 89 nations. It's a study called Women, Men, and the Global Quality of Life, showing that connection, that the status of women is actually a powerful predictor of everyone's quality of life. And since then, other studies have verified these connections. For example, the World Economic Forum's gender gap reports, they also confirm the correlation between the status of women and economic success. And, you know, there are many studies, McKinsey and so on, but they focus on depriving half the population of equal opportunities, which certainly deprives societies of enormous contribution. But think about it. As long as women are devalued, so are policies considered soft or feminine in domination systems. And I'll give you some examples. Somehow, there always seems to be money for these hard priorities, for prisons. Well, what is that really? It's the dominator stereotype of the punitive male head of household, isn't it? Or there seems to be always enough money for weapons for wars. And, you know, as a Holocaust survivor, I think that we need some defense, certainly. But, you know, it's gotten completely out of kilter here. But what really is that? It's what we learn to admire, to idealize. It's the dominator stereotype of the violent hero. All of which takes me to the third and really vital cornerstone, that we have to shift from domination to partnership economics, but economics from a new perspective that goes beyond the tired old argument about capitalism versus socialism and vice versa. Remember, capitalist and socialist economic theory actually came out of early, very early industrial times, out of the 1700s and the 1800s. So on that count alone, they would be antiquated in our 21st century knowledge service post-industrial era. But even more importantly, both came out of times that oriented much more closely to the domination system, a time when caring for people, starting in early childhood and keeping a clean and healthy home environment, which of course is also related to keeping a clean and healthy planetary environment, as you'll see, when it was to be performed by women for free in male-controlled households. For example, even in the mid-1800s, when Marx wrote, in many places, if a woman was negligently injured, she could not sue for her injuries. Only her husband could for loss of her services. So Adam Smith, Karl Marx, they failed to recognize the economic value of this, quote, women's work. And for both of them, nature was there to be exploited. If you look at their theories, there is nothing in either capitalist or socialist theory about the vital importance of caring for people or for nature. Both of these theories, as I detail in my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, are based on a flawed, incomplete model of economics, which fails to include the three vital life-sustaining economic sectors: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. So what we need is what we haven't had, a new caring economics of partnerism that gives real value and rewards caring for people, starting in childhood and caring for nature. And of course, again, the COVID-19 pandemic shows that, who are our essential workers? They do care work, health care, child care, or they provide food and other necessities that sustain life, just like nature sustains life. Now, a very, very important first step, because I've been called a practical visionary, and I'm always thinking of what are the tools for really positive change. A very important first step is changing our measures of economic health. Think about GDP. Which is finally beginning to be widely criticized, but is still the most widely used measure of economic health. Well, it actually includes activities that harm and take life. Think about making cigarettes, selling cigarettes, and the resulting medical and funeral costs. They're all great for GDP, goes up. The same is true of oil spills, the cleanup costs, the um, the litigation, the depositions. But not only does GDP put in negatives in as positives and cause a lot of what we need, quote, externalities, it fails to include the huge economic value of the work of caring for people in households, even though we are beginning to quantify its economic value. For instance, an Australian report showed that if the unpaid caring household work were included, it would comprise 50% of the reported GDP. Now that's huge. Yet none of this information is found in conventional economic treatises. It's not taught in our schools and universities, and it's up to us, to all of us, to you, to see that it is. And this is why I want to stay with this for a while, because I want to invite you to help us make visible a new metric, a new measure of economic health that we developed at the Center for Partnership Studies, Social Wealth Economic Indicators, or SWAYs. Unlike GDP, and unlike most other so-called GDP alternatives, these metrics, the social wealth economic indicators, provide empirical evidence of the enormous economic value of the work of caring for people, starting in childhood, in terms of human capacity development, which of course is the most important economic asset, isn't it, in our new knowledge service age, but also of caring for nature. And sways are really unique in so many ways. They take into account what we know from neuroscience, the vital importance of what children experience and observe in their early years, especially from 1 to 5, when we're told 85% of the structure of our brain is laid. Now, we're now in the process of updating and condensing what are 24, it's a lot, of social wealth economic indicators into one number, so that government and business policymakers have the missing data they need so they can see connection. For example, the social wealth economic indicators show that the United States lags far behind other developed nations in investing in family support, in education for young children, uh, in all kinds of care activities, really. And of course, this, not coincidentally, the United States has the highest child poverty rate, the highest maternal mortality, the highest infant mortality rate of any OECD nation. And you can find out more at centerforpartnership.org or at partnerism.org. So, yes, and I really want to stay with how cost effective caring for people starting in childhood and caring for nature is. Um, to begin with, there's this idea, well, yeah, this is all very nice, but we have to be cost effective. Well, we have a lot of data. It's in my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, as well as in these websites, that businesses that have caring policies and the partnership structures that go with this do extremely well, but so also do nations. And I want to stay with that. Uh, because fortunately, here again, we don't have to start from scratch. There are trends in this direction. And we clearly see these if we look at nations that at the beginning of the 20th century were so poor that they had famines, nations such as Finland, Norway, and Sweden, nations that are today regularly in the highest ranks of the World Economic Forum's global competitiveness reports, as well as in the highest ranks of the World Happiness Reports. Not coincidentally, these nations pioneered caring policies, government-supported childcare, universal health care, stipends to help families care for children, elder care with dignity, very generous paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers, all of which are really lacking in so much of our world. But these policies and the resulting high lifespans, low poverty rates, low crime rates, and a generally high standard of living for all, they didn't happen in a vacuum. And no, they didn't happen because they're socialists. These are not socialist nations. They have very healthy market economies. Nor did it happen, as we're sometimes told, well, because they're relatively small and homogeneous. Think of all the nations that are relatively small and homogeneous that do not have caring policies, that orient to the domination side. It happened because these are the contemporary nations that have moved most closely to the partnership side of the partnership domination scale. They're not ideal, but first, they have more democracy and equality in both the family and the state. Second, they have the lowest gender gaps. Third, they're in the forefront of trying to leave behind traditions of violence and domination. This is very important. They pioneered the first peace studies, the first laws prohibiting physical discipline of children and families, which, by the way, is a very important trend. About 50 nations have, at least on the books, adopted these kinds of laws. And I want to get back to gender. You have a gender track. These nations really do have a much more equal partnership between women and men 40 to 50% of their national legislators are female. And what happens, and this is really very important, we need to understand these interactive dynamics. As the status of women rises, men and women too, but men no longer find it such a threat to their status, to their masculinity, to also embrace more caring practices and policies. So we're back to connecting the dots and recognizing the key importance of the status of women and children for a nation's politics, economics, everything. And by the way, this is essential for cutting through seemingly intractable cycles of poverty worldwide, because it isn't just gender discrimination, it's the valuation of care work of women and anything stereotypically associated with women, such as the work of care, still primarily performed by women for little or no pay in most world regions. That's a major reason that the mass of the world's poor and the poorest of the poor are women and children, that in the wealthy United States, women, most of them who are or were either full or part-time caregivers, are almost twice as likely to live in poverty than men of the same age. Now, we have to connect the dots. We have to help our policymakers connect the dots, all of which takes me to the fourth cornerstone, which we've already, of course, talked about, stories and language. Now, many of the stories we've inherited really reinforce domination systems, domination thinking. Um, I've already said how our conventional categories, well, a colleague of mine calls them weapons of mass distraction, because they fragment our consciousness. But think about the story about human nature, whether it's original sin or selfish genes, it's the same story. So I don't know why they're arguing with each other. The story is we're bad, there's something wrong with us, so we have to be rigidly controlled from the top. Fairy tales. I mean, talk about gender stereotypes here. And you have to have rigid gender stereotypes, by the way, if you're going to rank one kind of human over another, a male human over a female human. And as I said, this has nothing to do with anything inherent in women and men. Women internalize this system just as much as men do. But think about poor Sleeping Beauty. She can't even wake up unless a guy kisses her. And think of how men are devalued, boys are devalued if they express their full humanity, their sensitivity, their caring. They're marked, aren't they, as sissies, as wimps, even, as I said, by women who are indoctrinated with these values of domination. So this takes me back to language. Why do we need new terms? Well, as if we, linguistic psychologists have long told us something we really need to take into consideration. The categories provided by a language, and this is particularly true of our social categories, they channel our thinking. So it's almost impossible to think of other alternatives. Uh, and that's why this new language of the partnership system, the domination system, of partnerism, of the partnership domination scale is so important if we're really to move forward and avoid these terrible regressions. We also need other terms. I've coined terms like a distinction between what I call hierarchies of domination. We all know about those. Uh, you better obey or else, and hierarchies of actualization, where responsibility, respect, benefit don't just flow from the bottom up, but both ways. And there are trends in this direction. So look, I want to close because, well, our time is up. Um, but I want to say that the struggle for our future, as I've think I've made clear, is not between religion and secularism, East and West, right and left, capitalism and socialism. Look at the two mass applications of socialism in the former Soviet Union and in China, but between the domination elements in all our cultures and the partnership norms we urgently need. And yes, so also is the struggle of whether or not AI and other technological breakthroughs, biotechnology, nanotechnology, whether they are or are not used for the common good. There's so much more I would like to share, but I do need to close. And I want to close on a note of action. I want to invite you all to join me in the partnerism movement to accelerate the shift from domination to partnership worldwide. Yes, we have to continue our short-term work. We have to see, for example, that governments no longer subsidize activities that are causing climate change, that are destroying our natural life support systems. But if we are to prevent losing the gains already made, if we are to prevent the regressions to domination that cause so much misery and destruction, we also have to do the long-term work. So I invite you to join me in the work of cultural transformation, focusing on these four cornerstones of childhood, gender, economics, and narratives and language. None of us can do everything, but everyone can do something to build the foundations for a more equitable, caring, and sustainable new normal of partnerism. And you in the AI community, actually, because of the power of this new technology, can play a major role in this. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Riane. This was not only a great talk, but helped us really frame the concept of collaboration that we are so much promoting in terms of using AI. We're a bit of behind schedule, but I'd like to, if you're okay, to ask you maybe one or two questions without delaying too much. You talked about the power of social wealth and how new tools of data and AI can help with collaboration and social wealth. Can you tell us what you think about how domination economics and usage of AI incorrectly can create artificial scarcities instead of artificial abundance or new abundance? I think we lost you again on the sound.
Can you?
We heard you briefly.
I keep unmuting and
You're perfect now.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Oh my gosh, I tell you, this new technology is wonderful, except when it doesn't work, right? But anyway, as I said, the problem is not capitalism. The COVID-19 pandemic showed that we need both trade, both markets, and government policies, but it depends on whether they're informed by caring for people starting in childhood and caring for nature or not. What we really have the problem with is what I call domination economics. And they go back to way back to Chinese emperors and to Arab sheiks and to Indian pashas, to feudalism. I mean, think about it for a moment. What in the world is really so-called trickle-down economics? It's domination economics where, as in feudal times, those at the bottom are supposed to content themselves, right, with the scraps dropping from the opulent tables of those on top. So this is why we really have to change our thinking. But we also need to understand that domination economics is very inefficient because it creates artificial scarcities. And it's not only by misdistribution of resources to those on top. It is, first of all, by the waste of resources in this chronic warfare, weapons, etc., an enormous drain. It also fails to invest in the work of caring for people starting in childhood, which, as we know today from neuroscience, is so fundamental, especially in our post-industrial age, when economists even never tire of telling us that the most important capital is that high quality human capital of resilient, flexible people who can work in teams, who can adapt to change. Well, we know now from neuroscience that whether or not that kind of high quality human capital is or is not produced largely hinges on the quality of care and education children receive early on, which takes us right back to this whole gendered system of values, doesn't it? I want to make a point here, Amir. Yes, partnership systems are more conducive to collaboration. But this said, we have to really understand that we're talking about configurations here. People cooperate all the time in domination systems, oil cartels, monopolies, terrorists, criminal gangs, they all cooperate, don't they? So that is not the issue that we always have to keep in mind is what are our guiding values? And that in turn is embedded in the degree to which a society orients to either the domination or the partnership side of the social scale. Now I can't hear you.
Thank you again, dear Riane. We are behind time, unfortunately, but it has been wonderful. I'm sure we have many questions unanswered, and maybe we can invite you at the closing days to share with you some of the findings and get your input on how those can actually participate in partnerism.
Well, I am counting on you because you have a wonderful and powerful technology that really can be used for the common good. So I'm counting on you to use that technology to accelerate this shift, which, as I said, we don't have to start from square one, from domination to partnership, and avoid these terrible regressions. So thank you so much. And I apologize again for all the technical difficulties.
It was our pleasure, and we've managed to to get a chance to listen to you. By the way, technology by itself is not enough. I think we need frameworks, and your words have been inspiring. Thank you again, and we'll invite you for the closing to share some of the learnings with you as well. Thank you again, Doctor.
I'd love that. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you very much.